I never expected to be living in a log cabin on my own mountain at the age of 35, but life has a way of surprising you. The police cruiser's flashing lights reflected off the cabin windows as I stepped onto my newly built porch, coffee in hand. Two officers approached cautiously while a middle-aged woman in a crisp pantsuit stood by their patrol car, arms crossed and a victorious smile plastered across her face. "Sir, we've received a complaint about illegal construction and trespassing on protected land," the taller officer said, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Mind if we ask what you're doing up here?" I took a sip of my coffee and smiled. "Just moving into my new home, officers." "Is there a problem?" That's when the woman marched forward, her designer heels struggling against the natural terrain. "This entire mountain is part of Pinecrest Estates. You can't just build whatever you want without HOA approval." Her voice carried the practiced authority of someone used to getting her way. Little did Karen Mitchell know she had just picked a fight with the actual owner of not just this cabin, but the entire mountain beneath her feet. "I'm Owen Ferguson, and after 15 years as an Army Corps of Engineers specialist, I'd finally cashed in my savings and a surprise inheritance from my grandfather to pursue my dream, living self-sufficiently in the mountains of Colorado. What I hadn't counted on was dealing with the most entitled HOA president in the state on my very first day. The inheritance had been unexpected. My grandfather, a man of few words who disappeared into these mountains when I was just a kid, had left me something I never knew he owned, a 500-acre parcel of pristine woodland surrounding Evergreen Peak. The lawyer who tracked me down at my base in Germany had been apologetic, explaining that the land probably wasn't worth much given its remote location and development restrictions. I disagreed. To me, it was priceless. "Officers, I have all my permits and property documents inside," I said calmly. "Would you like to see them?" The woman, who had yet to introduce herself, stepped between me and the officers. "This is ridiculous. Our association rules clearly state that all structures must be approved by the board. That monstrosity," she pointed at my hand-built log cabin, "violates at least 15 of our covenants." The officers exchanged glances as I maintained my composure. "Ma'am, let's see his documentation first." Inside my cabin, I retrieved the property folder my lawyer had prepared. The leather portfolio contained everything: the deed, transfer of ownership, property survey, and building permits approved by the county. I handed it to the officers while the woman hovered nearby, tapping her foot impatiently. "Mr. Ferguson, these seem to be in order," the younger officer said, reviewing the documents. "According to this survey map, you own quite a substantial piece of land here." The woman snatched the map from his hands. "Impossible. Pinecrest Estates extends to the base of this mountain. We've been collecting association fees for years from properties in this area." "Not from this property," I replied. "And not from this mountain." Her face flushed as she studied the survey. "This must be a mistake. I'm Deborah Mitchell, president of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association. I know every inch of our jurisdiction." That was the moment I realized this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. The look in her eyes wasn't just confusion, it was panic. After the officers left, recommending that Deborah take any property disputes to civil court, I thought the matter was settled. I spent the next week finishing my move-in, setting up my solar panels and completing the interior woodwork. The cabin wasn't large, just 1,200 square feet of rustic comfort, but it was exactly what I dreamed about during long deployments. Then the certified letter arrived. "Notice of covenant violation," the header read. It listed my unauthorized structure and demanded immediate cessation of occupancy until approval from the Pinecrest Estates Architectural Committee. The letter concluded with a fine of $100 per day and the threat of legal action. I called my lawyer, Samuel Harris, who had handled my grandfather's estate. "They're claiming jurisdiction over land they don't own," he said after I explained the situation. "This happens sometimes with aggressive HOAs, but usually not this blatantly. Send me the letter, and I'll respond officially." I should have known it wouldn't end there. 3 days later, I was awakened by the sound of an engine struggling up my access road. Through the morning mist, I spotted a tow truck followed by an expensive SUV. I quickly dressed and stepped outside just as they reached the small clearing where I'd parked my Jeep. Deborah Mitchell emerged from the SUV, accompanied by a heavy-set man in a Pinecrest Estates security polo. "Mr. Ferguson," she called out, her voice carrying the false sweetness of someone about to enjoy exercising power. "Since you've ignored our notices, we're implementing enforcement actions. Unauthorized vehicles on Pinecrest property will be removed." I walked closer, coffee mug still in hand. "Ms. Mitchell, we both know this isn't Pinecrest property. Our association boundaries were established 20 years ago," she replied, handing a document to the tow truck driver. "Your grandfather may have owned this land once, but it was incorporated into our development when he failed to pay his dues." That stopped me cold. "What dues?" "He never belonged to your HOA. Her smile widened. "We have documents proving otherwise. Now, unless you want to watch your vehicle disappear, I suggest you start the process of properly applying for building approval." The tow truck driver looked uncomfortable as he glanced between us. "Lady, I don't tow from private property without court orders. This isn't private property in dispute," she insisted. "Show him the paperwork, Dale." The security guard handed over a folder, which the driver briefly examined before shaking his head. "This isn't a court order, ma'am. It's just your HOA paperwork. I can't tow without proper authorization." Deborah's face hardened. "We have an agreement with your company for confirmed HOA properties," he interrupted. "This situation seems disputed. I'm not risking my license." As they argued, I noticed something odd about the document the guard was holding. From my angle, I could see what looked like my grandfather's signature on one of the pages. The problem was, I recognized that signature from all the estate documents, and this one didn't match. "May I see that?" I asked, stepping forward. "That's confidential association business," Deborah snapped, grabbing the folder back. "Dale, call another towing company. Mr. Ferguson, you'll be receiving additional fines for this obstruction." After they left, I immediately called Sam again. "They're claiming my grandfather signed HOA documents?" I explained. The signature looked forged. There was a long pause on the other end. "Owen, I think we need to dig deeper into Pinecrest's history. Something's not right here." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather, a solitary man who valued his independence above all else. The idea that he would voluntarily join an HOA seemed laughable. He'd built his original cabin, long since collapsed and replaced by mine, specifically to get away from such restrictions. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. The clerk, an elderly woman named Martha, greeted me with a friendly smile. "Property disputes," she sighed when I explained my situation. "Been seeing more of these since all those fancy developments started pushing into the mountains. Let me pull everything we have on Evergreen Peak." What she found shocked us both. According to the original county records, my grandfather's land had never been part of any development. The property lines clearly showed his land as separate from what would later become Pinecrest Estates. However, there was a more recent document, filed just 3 years ago, that attempted to redraw those boundaries. "This amendment was filed after your grandfather's death," Martha noted, frowning at the date. "And look here, it claims to be based on a membership agreement signed 20 years ago, but that agreement isn't attached or referenced by document number. Is that legal?" I asked. "Highly irregular at minimum," she replied. "I'm going to make copies of everything for you, and I suggest you take these to your lawyer immediately." Armed with the records, I met Sam at his office that afternoon. He reviewed everything, his expression growing darker with each page. "They falsified documents to claim your grandfather's land after he passed away," he concluded. "They probably thought the property would go unclaimed since your grandfather lived as such a recluse. When you showed up and started building, they couldn't back down without exposing what they'd done." "Can we prove the forgery?" I asked. "We have your grandfather's legitimate signatures from the estate documents. With a forensic handwriting analysis, yes, I think we can." But Owen, there's something bigger here. He pointed to the amended property map. Look at what they've claimed, not just your cabin's site, but the entire eastern slope of the mountain. I studied the map more carefully. The eastern slope, that's where the natural spring is. Sam nodded. Water rights in Colorado are incredibly valuable. I think that's what this is really about. The picture was becoming clearer. My grandfather's land included access to a substantial natural spring that fed several streams flowing down to properties below. In water-conscious Colorado, controlling that resource would be worth millions, especially to a development looking to expand. What's our next move? I asked. We file an emergency injunction to prevent them from taking any action against your property. Then we counter with evidence of document fraud, Sam replied. But first, I want to know more about Deborah Mitchell and her association. Something tells me this isn't her first questionable land grab. Over the next few days, Sam worked his legal connections while I did some reconnaissance of my own. I hiked the perimeter of my property, documenting boundary markers and taking photographs. Near the southeastern edge, where my land bordered Pinecrest Estates, I discovered something disturbing. Fresh survey stakes with Pinecrest markings had been placed nearly a quarter-mile inside my boundary line. As I was photographing these stakes, I heard voices approaching through the trees. I quickly moved behind a large boulder, just as Deborah Mitchell appeared with a man in a business suit I didn't recognize. The water access alone makes this acquisition essential, the man was saying. Once we control the spring, we can proceed with Phase 3 without county approval for additional water rights. We already control it, Deborah replied confidently. The mountain belongs to Pinecrest now. This stubborn veteran is just a temporary problem. A problem that could expose everything if he gets too curious, the man warned. The other parcels were easier, elderly owners who didn't understand what they were signing. But a military engineer might ask questions we don't want answered. Don't worry about Ferguson, Deborah said dismissively. People like him can't afford protracted legal battles against our association resources. He'll cave when he sees the daily fines accumulating. I remained hidden until they passed, my blood boiling at what I'd just heard. This wasn't just about my cabin. They had apparently been systematically targeting vulnerable property owners to expand their control. And now they were coming for my mountain. Back at my cabin, I found another notice taped to my door, this one claiming I was in violation of watershed protection regulations and threatening criminal charges if I didn't cease unauthorized usage of protected water resources. The irony was infuriating. I called Sam immediately and relayed what I'd overheard. This changes everything, he said grimly. We're not just talking about civil fraud anymore, but potentially criminal conspiracy. I want you to document everything, every notice, every encounter. And Owen? Be careful. People who commit this kind of fraud don't typically back down easily. He wasn't wrong. The next morning, I woke to the sound of machinery on my access road. A Pinecrest Estates maintenance truck was parked at the point where my driveway connected to the main service road, and 2 workers were installing a gate across my only access route. I approached them calmly. Gentlemen, what's happening here? One worker, barely out of his teens, looked uncomfortable. HOA orders, sir. This road is being restricted to authorized personnel only. This is my private driveway, I explained. You're on my property right now. The older worker shrugged. We just follow orders from the office. Take it up with management. As if on cue, Deborah's SUV appeared, crawling up the steep grade. She emerged looking pleased with herself. Mr. Ferguson, I see you've noticed our new security measure. After recent reports of trespassing, the board voted unanimously to secure all access routes within our jurisdiction. This is illegal, I stated flatly. You're blockading my property. She smiled condescendingly. You'll be provided with the code once your property compliance issues are resolved and outstanding fines are paid. Consider it motivation to address those violations promptly. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the sheriff. By all means, she replied unperturbed. But you should know that Pinecrest Estates has an excellent relationship with local law enforcement. After all, the sheriff's brother-in-law is on our board. While waiting for the sheriff, I called Sam, who promised to file for an emergency injunction immediately. When Sheriff Daniels arrived, his expression told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't here to help me. "Mr. Ferguson," he greeted me stiffly. "I understand there's a dispute about access rights?" I explained the situation while Deborah stood nearby, occasionally interjecting about HOA regulations and my unauthorized occupation of Pinecrest property. The sheriff looked uncomfortable but not particularly sympathetic to my position. "Sounds like a civil matter to me. If there's a property dispute, you need to handle it through the courts. And in the meantime, I'm supposed to be blocked from my own home?" I asked incredulously. He shrugged. "The HOA has documented their claim. Until a judge says otherwise, I can't order them to remove their gate." As the sheriff departed, Deborah approached me with a proposal. "This could all go away, Mr. Ferguson. The association would be willing to purchase your claim to this property for a fair market value. You could avoid a lengthy legal battle and walk away with cash in hand." "What's your definition of fair market value?" I asked. "We're prepared to offer $50,000 for your cooperation," she replied smoothly. I nearly laughed. The property was worth millions, especially with the water rights. "Not interested." Her expression hardened. "Don't be foolish. You're one person against an entire organization with very deep pockets and deeper connections. This won't end well for you." As she drove away, I realized I needed to change my approach. Fighting through official channels wasn't working, the deck was too stacked against me. If Deborah Mitchell had corrupted local officials and falsified documents, traditional methods wouldn't be enough. I needed to find evidence of their broader conspiracy. That night, I hiked around the gate and walked into town to meet with Sam at a small diner away from prying eyes. "The injunction was denied," he informed me grimly. "Judge Peterson claimed insufficient evidence of irreparable harm." "Peterson," I repeated. "Any relation to the Peterson construction company that built half of Pinecrest?" Sam nodded. "His son is the CEO. The connections run deep here, Owen." "Then we need to go deeper," I replied, pulling out my phone to show him photos of the survey stakes and boundary alterations. "They've done this before. Deborah mentioned other parcels with elderly owners who didn't understand what they were signing." "If we could find those owners," Sam began. "Exactly. We need to build a pattern of fraud, something too big for local officials to ignore." Over the next week, while continuing to access my property by foot through the forest, I began researching property records of land adjacent to Pinecrest Estates. Sam connected me with a retired title researcher named Dorothy Kennedy who had worked in the county for decades. Dorothy proved invaluable. Her memory for property transactions was remarkable, and she immediately recognized the pattern when I described my situation. "The Wilkins property on the South Ridge," she recalled. "Poor Martha Wilkins was 87 when they convinced her to sign some papers. She thought she was just allowing them to maintain the road that ran past her land. 6 months later, her nephew came to visit and found Pinecrest had built 3 houses on what used to be her wildflower meadow." "What happened?" I asked. "Martha passed away before the dispute was resolved. The nephew tried to fight it but eventually settled for a fraction of the property's worth. Said he couldn't afford the legal fees to continue." Dorothy identified 6 similar cases over the past decade, all involving elderly or absent property owners, all resulting in Pinecrest acquiring valuable land through questionable documentation. "They're strategic," Dorothy explained. "They only target properties with some special value, water access, exceptional views, road frontage. And always owned by people unlikely to mount an effective resistance." "Until now," I said. Armed with Dorothy's information, Sam and I decided to contact these former owners or their heirs. 4 agreed to meet with us, each sharing strikingly similar stories of manipulation, forged signatures, and pressure tactics by Deborah Mitchell and the Pinecrest HOA. James Wilkins, Martha's nephew, was particularly helpful. I still have all the original paperwork my aunt kept, including the document they claimed gave them ownership. I always knew something was wrong with it. The road maintenance agreement Martha had signed had somehow transformed into a property transfer agreement when filed with the county. The signature pages were identical, but the attached documents were completely different. Classic page substitution fraud, Sam explained. They get a legitimate signature on one document, then attach it to a completely different agreement before filing. We were building a compelling case, but I was still locked out of my own property except by hiking and through difficult terrain. The gate remained, and Deborah had now stationed a security guard to prevent me from approaching my cabin by the road. Things escalated when I returned from town one evening to find lights blazing inside my cabin. Approaching cautiously through the woods, I watched as several people moved around inside my home. Among them was Deborah Mitchell, apparently directing the others as they examined my belongings. I recorded the trespassing with my phone, then called the sheriff's office, not expecting much help but creating an official record. To my surprise, the responding officer wasn't Sheriff Daniels but his deputy, Officer Trevor Simmons. "I don't care what the HOA claims about property rights," Officer Simmons said after I showed him the video of people inside my home. "Breaking and entering is still a crime." When we approached my cabin together, Deborah appeared outraged at being caught. "We're conducting an inspection of a property in violation of association covenants," she insisted. "As president of the HOA, I have every right. You have the right to remain silent," Officer Simmons interrupted. "Which I suggest you exercise while I verify if you have legal authority to enter this residence." After checking my property documentation against the HOA's claims, Officer Simmons was unimpressed with Deborah's position. "Ma'am, at best this is a civil dispute over property boundaries. That doesn't give you the right to enter a private residence without permission or a court order." For the first time, I saw genuine fear in Deborah's eyes as she realized she might actually face consequences. "This is a misunderstanding," she stammered. "Our legal counsel advised that as part of our enforcement procedures, you can explain that to the judge," Officer Simmons replied, instructing her and the others to leave the premises immediately. He didn't arrest her, claiming he needed to consult with the district attorney first, but the official report of trespassing was the first real leverage we'd gained. That night, someone cut the lock on the gate blocking my road. I suspected Officer Simmons, though he would never admit it. The next morning, Sam called with exciting news. "The DA's office is interested in our evidence of document fraud. One of the assistant district attorneys used to work in elder law and recognizes the pattern we've uncovered." "Will they pursue charges?" I asked. "They're reviewing everything now. But Owen, there's more. I did some digging into Pinecrest's finances through public records. 3 years ago, they secured a multi-million-dollar development loan using future water rights as collateral, water rights they only obtained through the fraudulent incorporation of your grandfather's land." The pieces were falling into place. Deborah and her associates weren't just engaging in opportunistic land grabs. They were systematically acquiring properties to support a massive expansion project, likely the Phase 3, I'd overheard them discussing. Without control of my grandfather's spring, their entire financial structure could collapse. That explained their desperation. 2 days later, I received an unexpected visitor at my cabin. Dale, the security guard who had accompanied Deborah during the towing attempt, arrived alone and visibly nervous. "Mr. Ferguson, I need to talk to you," he said, glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting to be followed. "I can't be part of this anymore." Inside my cabin, Dale revealed that Deborah had ordered him to plant evidence of environmental violations on my property, specifically, to dump used motor oil near the spring to create a pretext for emergency intervention by county officials. "She's becoming desperate," Dale explained. "The bank is asking questions about the water rights documentation, and if they pull their funding, the whole development collapses." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, suspicious of his sudden attack of conscience. "Because she's talking about more than just forcing you out now," he replied grimly. "Yesterday, She told the board that accidents happen in remote cabins all the time. I signed up to check parking violations and patrol the neighborhood, not whatever this is becoming. Dale agreed to provide a sworn statement about the forgeries he had witnessed and Deborah's increasingly alarming directives. With his testimony added to our growing evidence, Sam felt confident we had enough to approach federal authorities, bypassing local officials who might be compromised. That evening, as I was documenting news survey stakes Pinecrest had placed on my property, I heard the distinctive sound of an ATV approaching through the woods. I ducked behind a large pine just as the vehicle came into view. Deborah was driving, with a man I recognized as Victor Peterson, son of the judge and CEO of Peterson Construction, riding behind her. They stopped near the spring that fed down to the valley below, and Peterson dismounted to examine the water flow. "The geological survey confirms it," he said, consulting some papers. "This spring can support the entire resort development without additional permits. But we need to secure it now, Deborah. The bank is getting nervous." "It's under control," she insisted. "Ferguson will be gone by the end of the week one way or another. I've taken steps." "What kind of steps?" Peterson asked, his tone wary. Deborah smiled coldly. "Let's just say there's going to be an unfortunate electrical fire at that eyesore of a cabin. With the remote location and response times up here, not much will survive." "Jesus, Deborah!" Peterson looked shocked. "We agreed to pressure tactics, not arson." "Desperate times," she replied dismissively. "Besides, it'll look like an accident, faulty wiring in an unpermitted structure. The insurance investigators won't look twice." As they continued discussing their plans, I carefully retreated, making sure to record their conversation on my phone. Once safely away, I called Sam immediately. "They're planning to burn down my cabin," I told him, my voice shaking despite my military training. "Tonight, from the sound of it." "Get out of there," Sam urged. "I'm calling the FBI field office right now. We have enough evidence with this recording to get immediate action." I didn't leave, however. Instead, I prepared. My years in the Army Corps of Engineers had taught me to defend a position, and I wasn't about to let Deborah Mitchell destroy my home. I set up motion-activated cameras around the perimeter and contacted Officer Simmons directly, bypassing the sheriff. To his credit, Simmons responded immediately. "This is way beyond HOA overreach," he said after listening to the recording. "I'll be there in 30 minutes with state police backup. The sheriff doesn't need to know until it's done." What followed was one of the longest waits of my life. As darkness fell, I positioned myself where I could observe approaches to the cabin without being seen. Sure enough, just after midnight, headlights appeared on the access road, moving slowly with only parking lights illuminating the way. Two figures emerged from a vehicle I recognized as belonging to one of the Pinecrest maintenance staff. They carried what looked like gas cans and moved stealthily toward my cabin. I watched through night vision binoculars as they circled the structure, apparently looking for the best point of entry. Just as they were preparing to douse the porch with gasoline, bright lights suddenly illuminated the clearing as Officer Simmons and two state troopers emerged from concealed positions. "Police! Freeze!" Simmons shouted, his weapon drawn. The would-be arsonists dropped their cans and raised their hands. One immediately started talking. "Ms. Mitchell sent us. She said it was just a scare tactic to get him to leave." Deborah herself wasn't present for the attempted arson, but the maintenance workers quickly implicated her under questioning. With the recorded conversation between her and Peterson, plus the attempted arson, the case had escalated from civil fraud to criminal conspiracy and attempted destruction of property. By dawn, state police had arrested Deborah Mitchell at her home. The search warrants executed on the Pinecrest HOA offices yielded a treasure trove of evidence: original documents that had been altered, correspondence discussing the systematic targeting of properties, and financial records showing millions in development loans secured with fraudulently obtained assets. The aftermath unfolded over the following months. Deborah Mitchell and 3 board members were charged with multiple felonies including fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and attempted arson. Victor Peterson faced lesser charges but lost his company and reputation in the process. The sheriff, while not directly implicated, resigned amid questions about his failure to investigate earlier complaints against Pinecrest. As for me, I finally got to enjoy the mountain home I'd dreamed of. The court not only confirmed my ownership of the entire property, but awarded substantial damages against the Pinecrest HOA. Several of the previously victimized landowners joined a class action lawsuit that eventually dissolved the corrupt association entirely. 1 year after Deborah's arrest, I hosted a gathering at my cabin for everyone who had helped expose the fraud: Sam, Dorothy Kennedy, Officer Simmons, now Sheriff Simmons, and the former property owners who had shared their stories. We sat on my expanded deck, watching the sunset paint the valley below in golden hues. "You know what the best part is?" James Wilkins said, raising his glass in a toast. "Knowing that my aunt's land will be restored to the nature preserve she always wanted it to be." I nodded, feeling a deep connection to my grandfather's legacy. Some places deserve to remain as they are. Not everything needs to be developed or controlled. As twilight settled over my mountain, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. I had come seeking peace and solitude after years of military service, only to find myself in a different kind of battle against corruption and greed. But in the process, I had found something unexpected: a community of honest, principled people and a true home worth fighting for. The mountain was mine, yes. But more importantly, it would remain as nature intended for generations to come, something my grandfather would have appreciated more than anything else.